When did a bad person have to face the consequences of their actions? Mussolini getting killed and strung up by communist partisans after decades of fascist rule over Italy is up there. At least he was up there until they eventually took his corpse down. One of my favorite stories from my ancestry, talked about it before but it's very fitting here. My great-3x-grandfather was a Union soldier who temporarily served as a prison guard at Camp Chase, in Ohio, for captured Confederate soldiers, and this story passed down from his diary journals was always crazy to me. I'm glad his writings were preserved. At least at his time, the officers tried to distinguish between the low-level conscripts and the higher-ranking officers who were more likely to truly believe in the Confederate cause. Life was tough for the conscripts as the camp got bigger, but they weren't given any additional punishment. Some were even allowed to enjoy recreation like playing baseball. There was a strong sentiment, though, that those Confederate soldiers, often of higher rank, who believed in the Confederate cause, slavery, the rebellion, etc., must face some additional punishment, even before the end of the war. Some informal tribunals were set up at the camp to investigate which Confederate soldiers were culpable and to sentence them to punishment. Some of these punishments were pretty gnarly. One in particular stuck out in my 3x-grandfather's mind long after the war, and he always felt it was justified, nasty as it was. There was a cattle barn on site, I guess to provide food milk for the officers or maybe even the prisoners, with maybe a few dozen cattle. Confederate captive officers would be led to the barn in cuffs, forced to climb up onto a cow or an ox facing backwards, and lie down, face hanging off the end, until his face was level with the animal's hindquarters. The Union guards would press his face into the cow's butt and bind him tightly in that position, and leave him there to serve his punishment. 8 hours a day for 3 days was a common sentence, and apparently it was feared more than any other. He recalls going into the barn on some days to get milk, and seeing a line of 20-30 cows, all with a Confederate captive tied up face to ass, hearing all the gagging and retching as he'd pass by. When a bad person messes with consumers, sometimes they get away with it. When they mess with investors, oh boy, they're in a world of hurt. And number X200B. Elizabeth Holmes pretended to have blood testing tech. Sam Bankman-Fried pretended to be solvent. Nikola Corp founder pretended his electric trucks actually worked. Martin Shkreli, jacked up insulin prices but was arrested for security fraud. I worked at a petting zoo for a time, and 2 teenagers were harassing a llama. The llama spat at the girl, and she yelled, "Ooh!" and gagged a bit and wiped it away. The 2 laughed, and then the boy started wagging his finger at the llama and spat at it, as if to get revenge. Well, the llama spat at him too. But he didn't get the saliva-only warning spit, he got the thick, green defense mechanism weaponized stuff, point blank in the face. He stood still a second and then instantly fell to his knees and barfed. His girlfriend threw up too and ran away. I was watching all of this from the interior building, with the small petting zoo's only restrooms, and was locking up since it was closing time. The girl ran up to the building frantically knocking on the door to let him in to wash up. I said no way, first of all because I don't want the whole building to stink like hell for the next 48 hours, and secondly because he deserves the natural consequences of his actions. Not sure how he got that gunk off, but I'm sure it was quite a learning experience. Oskar Grillwanger was a Nazi commander who was of particular cruelty. He commanded a penal brigade that was especially savage and crude. He had no regard for the rules of war at all. Of note, he was the first guy to come up with the idea to take captured women and children of Jewish and Slav descent off and have them walk through enemy landmine fields before his brigade would, as to trigger any mines so his soldiers wouldn't. He was even formally chastised by the fucking SS, the Nazi death squads, for being too cruel on multiple occasions. As the war neared its end, Oskar was captured in Swabia by Polish Jewish soldiers who had joined the French army. Word of his reputation was well known by this time. His captors walked him down to a basement and slowly beat him to death with their bare hands. 2 years ago, a kid in my neighborhood who usually threw stones at strays decided to throw stones at a big wasp's nest and face the consequences. In my experience, I've witnessed a moment where accountability finally caught up with someone who had been behaving questionably for quite some time. It was a colleague of mine who had a habit of cutting corners and taking credit for others' work. Eventually, their actions were brought to light during a project review, and they were held responsible by our team leader. It served as a valuable lesson about the importance of integrity in the workplace. Communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena were overthrown and killed by firing squad in 1989. They lived in opulence while starving and terrorizing the Romanian people for 24 years. My parents remember watching their execution on TV. Bernie Madoff died in prison. Bernard Madoff, the mastermind behind the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Yusu Nayat. Marcus Licinius Crassus. Remember that pedo that got shot in the face by his victim's father? Anyone remember Judge Cicconetti in Ohio? He'd often give criminals a choice between prison time or an unusual, fitting punishment for their crimes. Yes, this is legal. There's wide discretion on terms of probation, and if the offender and prosecution agree to a specific punishment, it'll never be appealed anyway, so the cruel unusual question will never be ruled on. The offender could probably appeal and get out of most of his punishments, but then they'd just go to prison, and they don't want that. Just to head off the Eighth Amendment questions his stuff always gets. Anyways, in 2016, there was a woman who grossly neglected her dog, letting it lose a bunch of weight and live in filth, who ended up in his courtroom for animal neglect. He gave her a deal. She could avoid jail time if she agreed to spend an entire day sitting in the county dump, in the stinkiest, smelliest place they could find there, adding, "If you puke, you puke." My friend actually worked as a probation officer around there at the time. He remembers their office calling the sanitation department inquiring about where the stinkiest part of the dump was, and the sanitation not believing the whole situation until they had showed them the judge's orders. After that, and learning what the woman did, they were more than happy to help. They showed them a nice little section that had been used for a bunch of waste from a seafood restaurant and an animal shelter recently, all cooking in the hot sun. I think the woman ended up wishing she'd taken jail time. I mean, how many pedophiles get killed in prison? Bad people usually get what's coming to them in the end. Unless they are elected. Ask me after Trump loses the election. Smiling face with smiling eyes and rosy cheeks. If Trump wins the election, don't talk to me. A notorious individual in my community faced the music when evidence of their fraudulent schemes came to light, leading to their long-awaited arrest and subsequent trial. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Timothy McVeigh, Albert Fish. My bully through college got expelled at our graduation. What a fucking idiot that guy was, when they were poor.